Hey everyone, welcome back to the Student Ministries Conversation podcast with your host, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are so glad that you are joining us today, and we hope that you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you continue to lead your students in ministry. Before we get into today's episode, we want to remind you about following us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are all at Talk Student Men. And also, you can join us on our website, studentministryconversations.org, where we put show notes and other resources for you. And if you happen to be on the Clubhouse app, come join us with conversations twice a week on Monday afternoon and Thursday morning. We would love to see you there. So today we're going to hear an interview with Stephen Gehring, and he shares a little bit about pastoral care and taking care of yourself. So Brent, you did this interview. You want to tell us a little bit about what we're about to hear?
Yeah, so Stephen is a great friend of mine, and I've known him for a long time. He's been in youth ministry for a little over 10 years now, and he just finished his Master's of Arts in Biblical Counseling from Dallas Theological Seminary. And so he has a heart for pastoral care, and he has a heart for being the one that seeks out and goes after the pastors that are ministering to so many other people, because a lot of times we pour out ourselves so much and we do so much for other people. And a lot of times we forget about ourselves. And so we just go through a few tips and tricks on how important pastoral care is, and then also how we can practice pastoral care, and then how we can also provide pastoral care for others that we know that are in ministry. Great conversation.
Awesome. Well, that is going to be a great conversation. And in fact, without any more delay, let's get to your conversation with Stephen Gehring.
All right, guys, welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Brent Aiken, and our guest this morning for the podcast is Stephen Gehring. Stephen Gehring is a youth pastor, and he is also a recent master's degree recipient in biblical counseling. And so I'm going to let him do a little bit more explanation on himself, and then we'll jump into the questions. So Stephen, go ahead and take it.
Sure. Good morning, Brent. Thank you guys for having me on here. Like Brent said, I've been in youth ministry for about 10 years and have been in counseling for about 3 years now as well. I started out, 16 years old, feeling the call to ministry from the Lord and jumping into that. And it was about, I would say, 3 or 4 years into youth ministry when I began to see and notice just a lot of the pastors and youth pastors around me that were struggling with things like loneliness or teetering on the edge of burnout, or hearing about moral failures, family issues, just all kinds of things. And being in the Methodist Church, you're really connected there. And so you get to hear a lot of these stories and interact with a lot of these people. And I just felt a burden on my heart for, God, these are the people that have given their lives to serve you, and they're struggling mightily. They need some help. They need people to come alongside of them and carry their burdens. They need a safe place where they can talk about real issues and not be concerned about, if I tell the wrong person, am I still going to have my job because I'm a sinner like everybody else, And so that's what led me to go to seminary and to get the degree I did. And so, like Brent said, I do counseling at our church, but I also one of the things I'm branching out into is providing counseling and care and support for people like you, for people that are doing the things that we do day in and day out, because it can be stressful, it can feel lonely, and it can feel like, where do I turn for answers? How do I get some help in the midst of the struggles that I feel when I can't even tell the people in my church about them for fear of repercussion? And so that's kind of my heart of why I have chosen the path I have, and just coming on today, man, I love youth pastors. I love youth ministry. I love students. And so my heart is just caring for the people that do what we do day in and day out.
Yeah, definitely. And so you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but I did want to go into just a little bit of a breakdown of why, for especially the new youth pastors or the new children's pastors or whoever's listening to this, why is pastoral care so important?
Sure. I think first off, just theologically, when we think about God and creation, for 6 days he spent creating and making everything that we see and know, and then he rested on the seventh day. And he didn't have to rest. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. He can keep working. But I think what we see in the scriptures is it's a model for us, and the Sabbath is a gift to us from God. Like what Jesus said. It was, man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. It's a gift. It's a gift to us from God. And so, and I know, a lot of times when we hear the word Sabbath, sometimes we're, I don't know if we need to keep doing that anymore the way they did in the Old Testament. I'm just talking about a day or a time or even a lifestyle of finding rest, finding relaxation, of finding spiritual rejuvenation. And I think it's so important because, God modeled it for us. Jesus modeled it for us. Many times he would get away from the busyness of life and ministry and just go and be with the Lord. So I think it's important, number one, for our health. Studies show that when we get away from the busyness of life, when we check out, it really helps everything else. It helps us be better spouses and better parents and better pastors, because our tank is more full than if we just kind of keep running on empty. There was a study done a few years ago that showed, and I know, talking to pastors here, one of the things we can be guilty of is overworking, is spending too much time, because it's hard. It's hard to turn off. Like, you can't turn off your phone because if there's an emergency, and so we feel like we're always on. But the study was done that if you work over 55 hours a week, like between 55 and 70 hours a week, that you are not going to get any more work done than if you worked between 50 and 55 hours a week, because you're so burnt out and you're so unfocused, I guess, in your time, because you're putting too much on your plate. And so I would just say, man, as an encouragement to pastors out there, and I think I was going to touch on this a little bit later, but setting healthy boundaries is one of the most important things that we can do. And so I would say, again, that Sabbath lifestyle, and then, our ministry is more than just words. I know, that's, for me, usually one of the highlights of my week is our midweek service and, our Sunday school time, when we get to preach the word and we get to encourage students, and that one-on-one time I get with some of our students and volunteers. But I know, and especially I'm thinking of, hearing talks from Doug Fields, what our students are going to remember the most, rather than like all the things that we said, they're going to remember the relationship they had with us and the lifestyle that we modeled for them. I know that's what I remember about my youth pastor growing up, is how he cared about me, and he took time to invest individually in my life, and the relationship he had with his kids. And those are the things that I remember. And sometimes it can feel like there's a big disconnect between those platform times, when we're talking to the students, and then just the rest of the week, the rest of our time. And I think that may be a product of the culture that we live in, where we feel like it's, more performance based. We have to put on this, this face, or we have to, especially the pressure as a pastor, like I have to appear, like I'm not struggling with sin as much as other people are. And hopefully, again, we're putting to death sin in our life, but again, we are all still, it's like an infection, that infection of sin within us, we're still pulled that way. And so, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, on stage, if you talk about sin, there's the pressure to, you don't really want to talk about a present struggle with sin. Or if you do, it's like a minor, like I struggle with anger sometimes, right? You want to frame it in just the right way.
The sin that everybody has.
Yeah, sin that everybody has. Or like I used to struggle with this, and so there's that pressure. And for me, I think that why pastoral care is so important is because, our ministry isn't just our words, it's our lives and it's our lifestyle. And, especially, I think primarily for our families, we need to take care of ourselves. And then beyond that, to our students and our church and the people around us. It's just, it kind of, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then the wheels are going to kind of start to fall off in other
Sure.
areas of our lives.
Sure. Yeah. And I can definitely relate. I mean, I joke all the time, and I tell volunteers and people that work with us in our student ministry is it's like, look, I remember my youth pastor. I think I remember 3 lessons that he ever taught me. I remember going to his house every Monday and hanging out with him. I remember his family. I remember his wife being involved in the ministry. I remember his kids regularly being up there and being a part of the ministry. I don't remember much of what he taught. And that's not what left an impact on my life. He had the relationship with me. And that was the thing that was like, oh man, I want to do this for the rest of my life kind of thing. And so it is important, but you kind of brought this up a little bit ago of the whole, like, a lot of times we find that refreshing recharge when we're actually in front of the students. And so what is the dangers of having that be our recharge moment, like when we're actually ministering to people?
Sure. Yeah. I think the danger there is making that almost, how do I say this? It can become an idol if we feel like we're getting our significance from that time in front of the students. And again, I guess I want to break that down a little bit. Ministry is a good thing. Preaching the word is a good thing. Being in front of students, one of our jobs is to hopefully be a model. As Paul said, I'm imitating Christ. You imitate me as I imitate Christ. That's one of our jobs is to model a relationship with Christ. So it's not a bad thing doing that. It can become a bad thing when we feel like my worth or significance as a person is based on how well I did on stage, how well I did in presenting this. And that's dangerous. And I know I myself have struggled with that. I'm a people person. I like people to like me. And so, one of the shadow sides of my personality is that I can base my significance on how well I did or I performed, or like if our youth group is growing, or if these students showed up, or if these students didn't show up. And so I think that partly, we do want to get rejuvenation from preaching the word. Because we feel like, man, I'm doing the thing that God called me to do, and it feels good. And that's a good thing. But making sure that that is not where I'm getting my primary source of significance. And I think that's a difficult thing as pastors. And Brent, I mean, you tell me if this is something you struggle with, or if this is just a me thing. For me, I feel sometimes like, because we're in the Word, we're preparing for messages, we're preparing Bible studies, we're putting together all this stuff. And so we're spending time in the Word. And so sometimes when I'm at home by myself, I have this feeling or this thought that comes into my head of, I don't really need the Word's not what's going to fill me up, because I've already been that. I've already done that. I already did that in my, quote unquote job.
Yeah.
And man, that's a slippery slope. And I'm saying that from a place of a struggle that I have had, and that I currently, it's those temptations in our minds, that I think the enemy plants those little seeds that, hey, you've already checked this off. What you really need to rejuvenate is to do one of these other things over here.
Video games, or watch Netflix, or
and again,
you need to go eat, kind of thing like that.
Those things, they're not inherently bad. And I think that's part of rest and relaxation. I think we need hobbies. We need things that we can go to and just just turn off my brain and be there. Those are not bad things.
Yeah.
But those things are not going to satisfy like Jesus does. Those things are not going to fill us up, rejuvenate us, give us the things that we need to be the best, spouse, the best parent, the best youth or children's minister that we can be. We have got to be in the presence of God, in His Word and prayer and worship. We have to have those times where we are prioritizing filling up ourselves. And I know, I think of ministry in different seasons. Our life is made up of different seasons. And I think of seasons in my life when I'm doing the work. I'm preaching the word. I'm being faithful with my students. But in my personal life, I'm failing in that area. And I look back on those seasons, and even just recently, coming out of one of those seasons, my wife, they had a conference here, the IF conference, and she went to that and it was just fired up and came back and like, man, we need to start worshiping together again. We need to get our family into worship. And just one of those things of, the Lord just kind of convicting, hey, we need to prioritize this again. We need to, for us to be filled up and for our kids to model, what it looks like to be in God's presence. And so I hope that as you're hearing this, you're hearing it not as like, the guilt or the regret that leads to death, like condemnation, but I hope you're hearing it as like man, God's heart for us is to be with him, is to do the ministry together. He wants to partner with us. He doesn't leave us on our own to flail around and figure it out and is all disappointed when we fail. I mean, he's with us. His Spirit is inside of us. And so just really having that spiritual rejuvenation time is so important.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the other thing that I'd kind of chime in on that as well is, if you consider your fill time is the time that you're being poured out to other people, eventually you're going to run out. And I mean, that's the primary end of burnout. Like, it's when you have nothing left in the tank. And eventually it's going to get to the point where you're pouring yourself out more than what you're filling with. And burnout's a scary place. I've personally been burnout before, and I was able to recover from that. But it's not a happy picture. It's not a place where you can just kind of go back and forth and just be happy-go-lucky. Like, burnout typically leads to a lot of like not only negative effects on how your ministry goes, but it also leads to a lot of negative mindsets and negative focuses that you tend to dwell in because you don't really feel like you yourself as a minister are effective, and you don't really feel like you're there anymore. Yeah. And so definitely good. And that kind of transitions my question into my next question of, so we know pastoral care is important, but for pastors and youth pastors out there that are maybe find themselves in this rut that we've been talking about, how can they start to practice self-care?
Sure. I think the thing that I think about is healthy boundaries. There is a book, and it's called Boundaries. It's by Drs. Cloud and Townsend. And you look it up, it sold millions of copies. They're Christian psychologists. And for me, it was a life changer reading it in seminary. And it's not like a seminary book. It's just a layman's term. Hey, boundaries are in God's word. And when you have healthy boundaries, your life is so much better. And I know that, in ministry, and especially when I started out in ministry, I felt like I couldn't say no. I felt like I had to always say yes, or I had to always take everybody's advice, or I had to be at every single thing. And man, that is exhausting. That is exhausting to feel like you can't say no. And so having healthy boundaries, like saying no, makes your yeses better. And I think that's one of the things they say in the book. It's something where if I can really think about my life and my work week and my time with my family and plan out, the things I'm going to say yes to, the things I'm going to say no to, it makes the whole rest of your life better because you're prioritizing things that are important to you. Personally for me, the way that looks like right now, we've got 2 kids, 6 and 3 years old. And our normal work day at the office is 9 to 5. For me, I work from 8 to 4. I go in right after I drop my kids off at school. And, it's usually just me with our secretary there until, the rest of the staff gets in later. But for me, I get off earlier so that I can spend more time in the afternoon and the evening with my kids, because that's when I know they're going to be home. And my off day, I'm interacting with my kids during different times. For me, I have a pretty hard and fast Sabbath on Saturday. I, most of the time, if at all possible, say no to any kind of ministry thing on Saturday. There's some weeks where you just can't do that. I mean, you guys know if you're in ministry, sometimes your week is crazy. And sometimes you're going to have a week where you're putting in, 50, 60 plus hours because you just have a lot of things to do. But for the most part, Saturday is our family day. And we know that, hey, however crazy the week has been, we're going to have this day to just chill, to rest, to be together. If we're, on a reading plan, that's a day when we're going to catch up and Bible reading together. And so it's just having those boundaries of, this is a time for just our family, or this is a time for just me during the week, when you can feel not guilty about, man, you know what? I need to spend some time in God's word. I need to spend some time in prayer right now. And even on the clock, I would say if you're on the clock and you are feeling spiritually tapped out, the best thing that you can do for yourself and for your ministry is to spend some time in prayer and to get in the word, in the middle of the workday, to be rejuvenated, to get filled back up, so you can do that. So healthy boundaries would be the first thing. And then I think I said earlier, rest, relaxation, and rejuvenation, those three things. How often are you sleeping? What's your sleep schedule look like? Just in the counseling world, we always think about, if you're not getting enough rest at night, everything else is going to be hard to do. And so making sure you're getting at least 7 hours of sleep, if at all possible. Relaxation, finding hobbies, finding things that you enjoy doing, and making those a priority, not feeling guilty about doing that. I love to play golf. And so I try and, once every couple of weeks on my off day, go and do that. Some days I'll take my son with me. Now, if I'm playing golf, 4 or 5 times a week and neglecting my spouse and my kids, then that's not how you're supposed to do it. My hobby is a selfish thing. And so you do want to watch out for that. But I think it's so important that we have those things that you can look forward to. Like, I can look forward to on my off day, you know what? I may get to sleep in that day, or I may get to go play golf, and that kind of keeps us going when you have things to look forward to. And then that rejuvenation we talked about, just being in the Lord's presence, is such an important thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's definitely, there's times and there's moments for everything. And so, like, one of the things is, like, my wife and I, obviously we have our TV shows just like every other couple do. And so the thing is like, we know that we're not going to watch those shows till probably our kids go to bed. Mm-hmm. And so we have set aside days to where we watch shows together, or we like sit on the couch together or play board games, whatever. But then we also have times where we just separate and we kind of do our own things. I love video games. My wife does not. And so there are nights that I get on and I play video games, and my wife goes and reads or goes and takes a bath and just relaxes in there for a while or whatever. And so I think that finding moments to where your habit or where your hobbies aren't damaging is great. And so, like you said, playing golf 5 times a week, golf is a very, very time sucking endeavor. You can't go play golf in 30 minutes. No. And so, well, you probably could, but it would not be fun. Yeah. And so it's important to have almost put boundaries on your hobby time as well. And then the other thing that I would kind of throw to that nature is something that I was told pretty early on in ministry, is find a hobby that you can finish regularly. And it's something to the nature of, I do graphic design and woodworking and stuff like that. And those are projects that can be completed. I can see the beginning to the end finish, because I think one of the damaging things that we find in youth ministry a lot is we are often just the seed thrower or we're the waterer, and we really don't see the end game. We don't see what comes to fruition, at least for years, if not decades down the road. And so having the hobbies that are fun is great, but also finding hobbies where you can like start to finish end a project, because that helps you seek completion. That helps you find, there's a lot of mental health in just finishing tasks.
Absolutely.
And whether that's like finishing chores. I mean, I don't know about y'all. I hate mowing, but I do a lot of it. And it's one of those things like when a yard looks bad and I get done and I finish the whole project, I'm like, man, it
feels
looks
so
great.
good.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah. And so
absolutely.
finding hobbies that you can do for completion purposes as well is super, super important.
That's a great point, Brent. I love that. I'm gonna put that into practice into my life. I never thought about it that way. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a pastor tell me that they did woodworking just for that purpose. He was like, because sometimes it literally will take decades before you see any growth or any change or any improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And like, he was like, if we are stuck in this waiting game forever, we're going to lose hope.
Mm.
We're going to lose hope in the fact that humans can be they can change and that God can do stuff. And like, it's not that we're doubting God, it's we're doubting the humans that he's entrusted us with. And so having that start to finish task of like just finishing and completing projects with your hands, it gives you hope for the longer cases, if that makes sense.
That's great.
So, kind of talking self-care still and everything like that. Obviously, pastoral care doesn't necessarily have to be to pastors as well. And part of our job with youth ministry and student ministry is teaching our students as well how to care for themselves. Yeah. And one of the big things I think that should have been a focus this year, if it hasn't been a focus, was mental health. Because 2020 was bonkers. I mean, I hope we don't ever have a year like that in the near future, because it was such a damaging and devastating effect on so many people. And I mean, everybody talks about the virus and COVID and Corona and all that. But one of the things that I've said is, the far more damaging thing is the irreparable damage that we're going to see over the next 2-3 decades of all the mental health problems that we're going to face and everything like that, because of all the problems that we've seen over the past year that are not going to come to light for years. And so how does pastoral care and how does self-care translate into student ministry? Like, if we were to make a focus on that, how would you recommend pastors kind of step into that with their students?
Sure. I think the first thing I think of is just being authentic and being vulnerable. And for those that are listening, if you're in ministry, especially student ministry, that teenagers know when people are being honest and truthful or when they're just blowing smoke. And so, I think that they are hungry for people to be real, for people to be authentic with things. And so, the first thing, just normalizing talking about mental health, normalizing talking about struggles with anxiety or depression or whatever is going on in your life, being honest about it. Again, you don't want to just have an hour kind of where you're just dumping everything to your students. And you don't want to do it that way. We want to be wise about how we present things. They don't need every single detail of what's going on in our lives or our struggles, but they do need to see that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to have these things. One of the things that in the church, I don't think it was intentional, but I know that I have heard a lot growing up feeling like, if somebody struggles with depression, you just need the joy of the Lord. All you need to do is pray and God will take that away. That's a prayer thing. It wasn't like I need medicine or I need to go see a counselor. It was, you need to pray. This is a faith issue or this is a sin issue. Sometimes sin is definitely related to depression. I don't want to come across saying sin's not a factor, but we're physical and we're emotional and we're spiritual beings. And so you got to think about all three of those factors. If you're struggling with depression or anxiety, sometimes if you're telling somebody to pray, it's not a prayer issue. It's like a thyroid issue that it's not doing what it's supposed to do, or it's a neurochemical issue in your mind where, the serotonin is not bouncing around enough in your brain and you need some help that way. And so just normalizing, hey, it's okay if you are struggling with these things. This isn't like a God is judging you or God is punishing you. And it's not inherently a sin issue. It can be just, hey, there's something going on in your brain. There's something going on emotionally in your life. And so, counseling and medicine that's able to help out with those things. I tell everybody, I'm a counselor. And so I tell everybody that you should go to counseling. I think everybody should go to counseling. Not because I'm let me just back that up. Partly because I'm a counselor and I think that it's important, but more so because in order to be a counselor, I had to go to counseling. And so I had to go through 20 sessions of counseling. And it was so helpful for me to have an objective person that I could just go and talk to and tell them anything, all the struggles that was going on in my life, the things from my past that I wanted to bring up, and just have somebody speak into that. And this person was also a Christian. And so to speak into it from a biblical perspective as well, so helpful to me. And so, even, whether that's you seeking counseling yourself, whether that's if you see a student with an issue, I think from the pastoral side, we can help them to a certain point. But when we see things, that are like, what, this may be above my area of expertise, find a local counselor in your area that you can refer them to, because that's such a beneficial thing, to be able to have somebody in your life that you can turn to when you feel alone, when you feel like you don't know what to do. I'd also say, if we're talking about how does that care translate into student ministry, just that authenticity, and then just from a personal level, like we talked about earlier, having that fuller tank in your life. And, I think people can see when we are full of the Holy Spirit, when we're in God's presence, when we're preaching from a place of being full. And I think that is going to translate into the effectiveness of your ministry. I think sometimes we can, and it's hard because we live in a numbers world, and we can get into that numbers game where we judge our ministry based on, the number of people are coming or how much we're growing. And I don't want to speak against that. It's not a bad thing for a ministry. I hope that it does. I hope that more people come while we're doing what we're doing. But I think that, talking with one of my mentors the other day, he was saying that, I think the metric that we need to judge our ministry the most by is, am I preaching the gospel? And am I sowing seeds of discipleship? He said, I think when we look at the scriptures, that's what Jesus did. That's what the disciples did. And that's the main thing they cared about. So not, how well is this thing going, or this program, or how many students, or it's, am I being faithful to the gospel? Am I living that out in my life? And am I sowing those seeds into our students? And so to me, that feels freeing. That feels like it takes that pressure off of the numbers game where I'm so focused on, man, we need to get more kids, or we need to get them into this. We need to get them doing this thing. Am I being faithful in my own life? Am I practicing that self-care? Am I being in the Lord's presence? Am I presenting the gospel as clearly as I can? And I think if you're doing those things, that's going to translate a lot into the things that you do every week.
Yeah, well, and definitely. And there's, we bring up Doug Fields again because just of the impact that he's had in youth ministry. And this book will probably be referenced a lot through this podcast. But my first 2 years in youth ministry by Doug Fields, one of the things, I literally have it plaqued on my wall right here. And it's the top 10 youth ministry commitments. And it's, I will move slowly. I will regularly check my motives and evaluate my heart. I will steer clear of the numbers game. I will not criticize the past. I will avoid the comparison trap. I will focus on priorities. I will pace myself. I will serve. I will be a learner, and I will pursue contentment. And it's just like those 10 things so much have value and weight when it comes to mental health and health, like health of not only yourself, but your ministry and everything else. And so having even boundaries like that, having these guidelines that you can look and say, hey, like there's this awesome new thing that we can do with the kids. And it's like, oh, wait, hold on. I'm going to pace myself.
Yeah.
Is this really, really beneficial, or is this just another thing that we're adding? How much time is this going to take away from me and my family? Is this going to involve other people being pulled away from their families? Am I being a catalyst for positive change, or am I pulling more people away and causing destruction in the process? And so like all these different things kind of weigh into it. And for everybody listening, if you haven't read that book, I would super, super encourage you to pick it up. You can find it practically everywhere. It's also sold tons and tons of copies because it's really, really such a great book. And it's one of those books that I would really recommend that you pick up every couple of years, because even Stephen and I have both been in youth ministry for close to a decade now. It's still a book that I can pick up and say, man, I've really slacked on that the past couple of years. I really need to work on this.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book. And I love that list, Brent, and I think as you were saying that, I was thinking of, pastors with families. And I think, when we have a spouse and when we have kids, we have to realize that our ministry is going to change. You're not going to be able to be the same youth or children's minister that you were before you were married after you get married. Things have to change. You're not going to be able to be the same minister you were before you had kids after you have kids, and after you have multiple kids. Things have to change, because the way I look at it, Paul says, his one argument about like not getting married so you can be focused on the Lord. There's definitely merit to that. If you want to be single, you don't have all these other things. But he also says in Ephesians 5, he who loves his wife loves himself. And so it's not a bad thing to prioritize your family. It is not a bad thing to prioritize your kids. I think that's the most godly, healthy thing to do, is that when you make this covenant with your spouse, okay, now this person is taking first place in my physical relationships here on earth. When I have kids, okay, these relationships are now primary. And so if I could just speak something that that I've had spoken into me many times, is just, if there is any guilt or feeling of like competition between your family and the church, I know a lot of us feel that. Man, do not feel bad about putting your family in first place. Do not feel bad about saying, you know what, I'm going to have to say no to some things that I used to do before I was married or before I had kids, because now, I need my kids to know that they are first place in my heart. I'm a father, I'm a husband and a father before I'm a pastor. And I think that's something, when I got hired at the church, I just told them, I was like, guys, I made a covenant with my wife. I haven't made a covenant with you. I've made a covenant with the Lord. I'm going to serve him, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to work as hard as I can while I'm here. But you got to know that for me and my wife, this is a lifelong primary commitment. And so that's going to come first, before anything that goes on here. And so, and I know we can sometimes, people make you feel guilty for that. Like, oh yeah, like why aren't you coming to my kids' games all the times? Why aren't you doing all these different things? For me, I know that we've got at least 3 family days a week in the evening time when I say, okay, if the events start to stack up, I'm going to have to cut something, because right now with the season that my kids are in, I'm prioritizing time with them in the late afternoon and in the evening. And, it's so important to our kids, especially, and to our spouses. Golly, I probably need to start with that, that our spouses see, hey, I'm committed to you just as much or even more so than I'm committed to the work that I'm doing at the church, because that can be, I see pastors' wives, in counseling. That's one of the things, some people that I talk to, for pastors' wives or for, pastors' husbands, you can feel like your dreams, your life is just on the back burner, and there's a struggle where, the trap, and talking to many pastors' wives, it's just, I feel like I'm invisible. I feel like I'm just, I'm not as cared for, or there's not the emotional support, or, my spouse lights up more when they talk about the church more than when they talk about me. And it's a struggle. And I think that, the busyness of our culture can push us in that direction. But man, I know that one day we are all going to stand before the throne of God. And I think if I can wholeheartedly say, I love my wife as much as I could, as much as myself, I love my kids. That's going to be the thing that's going to have, I think the greater impact is how do I love my kids day in and day out? How do I love my wife day in and day out? And so I say all those things. If I'm going to miss on a side, of like that balance between family and ministry, I'm going to miss on the family side, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people thinking, Stephen, he goes home at 4 every day. I do go home then. I'm there an hour early so that I can go home then, so that I can spend this time with my kids. Cause I know soon, they're going to be with friends during that time. I know soon they're going to be out of the house, and I only have this season with them, for just a short time. And so I'm going to prioritize. This is my time with my kids. This is my time with my spouse. And so, just to speak, if there's any guilt associated with those things in your life, man, please get rid of that, because prioritizing your family is, I don't think you can go wrong if you're falling on that end of the spectrum. If you want to be safe, fall on the side of family.
Well, and I think there's a few notes that I'd throw in with that.
Sure.
Is first and foremost, especially, well, I mean, it's both sides. If you are an unmarried youth pastor right now,
mm-hmm.
you need to know that going into marriage, they come first, period. Yeah. There is no, there's no tie, there's nothing. And I will verbally tell that to anybody that says, or that talks to me about it. My wife is, God is first, period. But my wife is second. There's no contest between first and second. I mean, God obviously comes before my wife, but I'm serving God by loving my wife.
Yeah.
And then secondly, and I even tell my kids this, my kids are third. There's not my wife and my kids are tied for second place. It's my wife is second and my kids are third, because my job as a parent is to set them on the course for the best life that they can have. But ultimately, after 18 years or so of life, they are going to leave and they are going to start their own families, and we'll still be there as support. But I'm with my wife for the long haul. When I said till death do us part, that overweighs the 18-ish years that I have my kids.
Yeah.
And so my wife, and loving my wife and supporting my wife, will go far ahead and far before my kids. Yeah. And sometimes that's stepping in and saying, hey, you really need a night out. When I am dead, beat, tired, exhausted. And it's just putting her needs ahead of mine. And sometimes that's, I really don't need a 5th event this week, or a 4th event this week, or I really don't need to extend camp 2 days or whatever. Or I know that all of these people go out the night before, and there's this fun little get together, but really no work gets done. It's just a fun hangout time. I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to come out the day of, because you prioritize and you value the time that you have.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely something that's a struggle, because, we are selfish people. Humans as a breed are selfish. Yeah. And so a lot of times it's really difficult to say, man, I want to go play golf, or man, I just want to veg tonight. I don't want to do anything else. Today was exhausting and tiring, and I don't want to, I just want to sit and do nothing for the next hour and a half. But there are days where you have to step up and say, no, they need it more than me.
Yeah.
And that is, that's the compromise, and that's the sacrifice that marriage is built on. Yeah. And so if you are an unmarried youth pastor, you need to know that day in and day out, starting ahead of time. Yeah. Because there are so many, like you said, there are so many marriages that happen. And like, I've even heard the expression of a wife saying to a husband that was a youth pastor of, I wish I was the church.
Mm.
And I mean, like, I didn't even have words. Like, how devastating and heartbreaking of a phrase is that? Because primarily, like we said earlier in this conversation, the things that we remember about our youth pastors and pastors were the time that they spent with us and how they involved us in their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not because they were up at the church 24/7, not because of them doing all the cool activities or events or anything like that. I remember my youth pastor because they involved us in their family. They allowed us to be around, but he also prioritized his family. And that was something that to this day I still see. And it's to this day something that I idolize. And it's something that I try to do because that's what I saw and that's what I modeled after.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, even speaking to that, Brent, that's such a good point. You need to, I guess, two things here when it comes to spousal relationships. Number one is get friends and get other people outside of your ministry that can speak into your life, that can say, hey, you're working too much, or hey, you're not doing this the right way. We have got to have people, and it's usually easiest outside of the church. Just to be honest, I mean, again, we love people, we want people in the church that we have good relationships with, but you need somebody that there's not that like weight of, oh, this is going to affect my job and I can't, be honest with this person. Somebody that can speak into your life. And then the second thing is, and I speak because of my personal struggle in this area in the past, is just to trust your spouse. Trust your spouse. When they tell you, hey, I think that you may be missing here. I think that you may be falling short in this area. You're not prioritizing me. I feel like I'm on the side. If your spouse is saying those things, I know defensiveness is the first thing that comes up in our hearts. Like, no, like, come on now, you're just being selfish. But man, it's so easy to go down that slippery slope. Nobody starts out in marriage and ministry thinking, you know what, I really want to make my spouse feel like junk all the time and feel like they're second place behind my ministry. Nobody starts out that way, but it's those little decisions, it's those little things where all of a sudden you wake up 2 years later and your spouse doesn't want to come to church anymore, or they've shut down because we've put our work in front of them. And I know, Brent, I know we both know people that are in that camp, or that there's been divorces because of those kind of things. And it's man, that's not the way that God designed ministry. He didn't put it together. So like, you know what? I want to make this really hard for these spouses. I want to make them angry at each other. And I want to make, that's not God's heart when he put all this stuff together. But it does take, even just going back to boundaries of healthy boundaries and saying, you know what? This is the time, this is the commitment I'm making to the church. And this is the commitment I'm making to my family, putting that calendar together, or you are really intentional about investing in your spouse, investing in your kids. And that's an investment that is never going to come back, empty. That's never going to come back void. And in fact, what you were saying earlier, Brent, about, loving our spouse and prioritizing them, when you prioritize your spouse over yourself, it is really good for you. It comes back in a really good way because they're happy, their tank is full. And then a lot of times they're gonna want to do things selflessly for you as well. And so it's that nature of Christ, of him humbling himself and loving at the cost of himself. And it's just such a good thing to do for our spouses.
Yeah, definitely. So 2 more questions and then we'll kind of finish it up. For pastors that are currently struggling, real brief, where can they go to get help?
Yeah. The first thing I would do is check with your denomination to see if they have resources available. A lot of denominations will have, whether it's counselors, that work through the denomination. They may have people that they know in certain areas that they can connect you with. So I would check there first. Um, I would go find a local counselor, somebody that you can talk to, that you can just be honest and open with. There's a lot of great, I mean, I know from being in seminary and being around a lot of counselors, the heart of a counselor is just to be there for you, to be a safe place and to be a place where you can grow and wrestle with the things that you're going through and do it in a safe place, in a confidential place. I can't emphasize how nice the word confidential sounds as a pastor, because so often we feel like if I let people see my struggle, then it is going to be a really bad thing for my life and for my ministry. And that's where, finding a local counselor, finding a Christian counselor who can just walk you through stuff, is a really beneficial thing. Finding people outside of your church, outside of ministry life that they can be there for you, is a really good thing. And I know some of that, it takes time. And especially if you're moving around a lot in ministry, I know that's the nature of ministry is we do move around a little bit more than other jobs. It's just finding those hard and fast friends that you can go to, that you can just, hey man, I'm struggling. I'm having a tough time. One other thing is finding a mentor, finding somebody that is older and wiser than you, who can, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, speak into your life. That's another really beneficial thing is having somebody who's been through already some of the things that you're going through right now. Can be a really healthy thing. And so those are just some suggestions if you're currently struggling right now. It is not bad to get help. I think that's the first thing I tell like all my clients is you coming here is a sign of courage and bravery and a sign that you care about your life and your marriage and your all the things like you. It's a good thing, and that God is just think of God's heart. He cares for the orphans and the widows. He cares for the people that are hurting, that need help. And he's so gracious in the way that he deals with us and our struggles. And so just having a person, like a physical person, be able to be in a way kind of the presence of God in your life. That's kind of how I think about counseling. And so I would highly suggest if at all possible, find somebody like that can help walk you through whatever you're going through.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And so the final one is how can people connect with you, whether it be on social media, if you have a shameless plug for anything, etc.
Yeah. So I guess I'm more old school with social media. The primary thing I use is Facebook. And so I think I made like an Instagram or a Snapchat like 8 years ago. I used it for a little while, but I have not been on there in years. So if people have messaged me there, I'm sorry. I apologize. You just want to connect with me on Facebook. You can search Stephen Gehring on Facebook, StephenGehring. And it's a picture of me and my daughter on there. And I'd love to connect with you there. Primarily, right now, the things that I'm doing, one of the things I do a lot is counseling online. And so if you are struggling and you feel like, hey, I need a safe place and a safe person to talk to, shoot me a message on Facebook Messenger. And I'd love to talk with you about doing that. I really try and make it cost effective for you because I know what being in ministry, there's a sacrifice a lot of times monetarily. We don't make what other people make. And if you want to go see a counselor, it can be expensive. And so my heart is really to get you the care that you need. So you can shoot me a message there. One of the things I want to do here pretty soon is to do some group counseling sessions online, where, we get a group of 5, 6, 7, youth pastors, children's pastors together, and we kind of have, a 10 or 15 week, group thing where once a week we're together for 90 minutes and we're just talking and about life and ministry. And that was another thing that was really meaningful to me. Group counseling, when I went through that, was such a benefit to me. And so if you're interested in that, shoot me a message on Facebook. And yeah, I mean, just anything. If you have any questions about any of the things we talked about, I'd love to connect with you. My heart is for you guys, primarily for you. And I think if I'm investing in you, then that's going to help you better invest in your family and in your kids. And so just holler at me on Facebook, and I'd love to connect with you there.
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate the time. Great stuff, great content for this podcast. And yeah, we're excited to see what happens and comes out of this. And hopefully for the people out there that are listening that do need help, that you do go to those places that Stephen recommended, or you message him, message us. The big thing is like, we're not alone in this. There are so many youth pastors that are going through the same things. There are so many youth pastors that have dealt with things in the past. And they're not ashamed, or they're not worried or scared about sharing those experiences with you. So find a community. And if you don't have one, we'd love to be the start of one. So thank you, Stephen. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks.
Hey, everyone. That was great. Thanks for joining us today. We hope that you were encouraged and inspired by this conversation, and that you found tools that you can use to pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, we would ask that you leave a comment and a rating on whatever platform you're listening to us on. We would appreciate that so much, because it helps the podcast get out to more people, and it helps us kind of climb the rankings as far as podcasts on all these different platforms. And then also, maybe you would know someone who would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment and share this with them on social media, tag them, and then also tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And so, Russell, you have next week's episode. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So I sat down with Melissa Glaves, and Melissa is a worship pastor and student ministry coordinator at Calvary Christian Church in Bellevue, Nebraska. We talk about worship ministry and youth worship teams, trying out, coaching, how to put teams together and how to equip them in the best way. And so it's a great conversation. Here is just a little bit of a preview from that.
So I think the more we can speak into, like any of our high schoolers, if you have a youth group that is 6 through 12, empower your high schoolers to lead your middle schoolers. And I think the more that we can get our students seeing themselves as role models and leaders within our ministry, I think that will carry out to their schools. I think that carries out to their families, their younger siblings, whatever that case may be. I think, I don't think any of our students wake up in the morning without mentorship and think, I'm a leader. I think that's kind of our job, to call it out of them and empower them in that.
Man, I'm looking forward to that one. And so just a reminder, please be sure to go to studentministryconversations.org for show notes and links from this episode. Just search for this week's episode number in the search bar, which is episode 005. We also have other helpful articles and posts on there as well. And then also just a reminder, if you happen to be on the Clubhouse app, look for our rooms in the Student Ministry Convos Club on Monday afternoon and Thursday mornings. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Y'all take care.